The last 10 years in behavioral health marketing for treatment center marketing has changed a lot. We've seen shifts within the industry from a legal standpoint, from a digital standpoint, and we're going to unpack all of those marketing and business insights today. And I couldn't have asked for a better guest. Today, I'm joined by Nick Jaworski. He's the CEO of Circle Social, which is an agency that specifically works with treatment centers. And he's been in the industry for over 10 years. He's going to unpack where we've been, what's changed, and then ultimately where we're going so that you, as a treatment center, can stay up to date. Nick, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Really happy to be here.
So if we go back 10 years, so pull the time machine, what was treatment center marketing actually like, and what was driving growth back then?
Man, such a big question, but important one for this conversation. Well, I actually wrote a piece a long time ago called The History of Marketing, or A Brief History of Marketing in SUD, which I would highly recommend readers check out. It goes through all of this. But it also starts with the origination of Circle Social and how we got involved in the behavioral health space. So as most people know, there was a lot of very shady marketing practices. Patient brokering is probably the one that people are most familiar with, but there were a lot of underhanded techniques in terms of stealing people's phone numbers, copying ads and making it look like a very prominent, famous treatment center, but then putting your treatment program's name on it. Lots of challenges around the way that things were done from an ethical standpoint. And those challenges still exist today, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but thankfully to a much lesser degree. Now, why was that happening within the marketing space? Really, because it was a very immature market, SUD in general. There was a ton of demand and very little supply. So all you had to do to be successful was kind of be the first to be seen. There was a lot of desperation. Remember back at this time, at least when we were starting to get involved in the space, we had the opioid crisis and epidemic. You had a large swath of moms across the country who were terrified that their kids were going to die from an opioid overdose. And so we saw a large volume of opioid use disorders in our treatment program clients, far more so than we do today. Because a mom would find out their kid's using heroin and like, oh my God, I need to get my kid into treatment today because my kid might die. I'm seeing this in the news. I'm talking to moms about it. So that urgency, that fear, that need to get into a bed tomorrow drove a lot of the search volume, a lot of the engagement with treatment programs. So again, you didn't really have to be a good treatment program. You didn't have to have great marketing materials. It was just like, as long as you got in front of them first, when they were in that moment of crisis, you were able to convert them into your program. And that's not the case at all today, but that would be the starting point.
Yeah. So just summarizing some of those thoughts, it didn't matter. You had minimal brand differentiation. A lot of the treatment centers looked really similar. You also had a unique historical context with the opioid epidemic. Previously, when you think about the crack epidemic or other types of the war on drugs with Reagan, it all seemed like it was happening to a certain population, right? Like these are people with low income, often people from different socioeconomic backgrounds or different racial or social classes. But what the opioid epidemic did is it really kind of leveled the playing field. Even though substance use has really been affecting people of all generations across the board, we now had a substance that was manufactured to make you addicted. A Netflix show called Painkiller, which kind of talks about that Purdue Pharma tirade. And it really paints a really good picture of how easy it was for people who got injured on the job and were looking for some pain relief and were given, a painkiller that ultimately got them addicted. And they couldn't do anything, right? There was no way out. And so there was a huge uptick in demand. It was now happening to middle-class families all across the board. Some of the other things you talked about was arbitrage, right? If you just knew how to run ads, PPC ads, you could get in front of a lot of people. But that didn't mean that you actually had to be good at what you were doing or to follow through on your promises. It just mean that you needed to be more present than the other people, that if people searched your name, you were able to show up, or if people searched for treatment centers or rehab near me, that you showed up, which back then, again, was a lot easier. So when we think about inflection points, like, okay, that was the way it was 10 years ago. What was an inflection point of how it changed? When did addiction treatment or mental health marketing and business change from just having some presence digitally to now things are way different?
Before I answer that, I want to give a little bit more, I think, context on the initial foundation that we came out of that you're talking about there.
Yeah.
It was that urgency piece around the opioids that drove a lot of what we call crisis calls. Think about, you find out that your teen son or daughter is out drinking, or maybe they're out smoking pot. Are you going to freak out about that? Probably not. A lot of parents won't. They might be concerned. They might have a conversation with their kids, but they're not like, oh my God, Johnny, get in the car. I'm taking you to treatment. So we've always had addiction in the country, and the rates of addiction have been pretty stable over the past couple decades. But the opioid crisis drove that component of urgency. And then what was also connected to that was Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and that requiring mental health and addiction reimbursement. And the payers didn't really pay attention to it, didn't know what to do with it. So there were insanely high reimbursement rates, particularly for out-of-network providers. What this meant is that you had a ton of margin that you could spend on marketing. So when you're getting reimbursed $60,000 to $90,000 a patient, remember when we first got into the industry, one of the first people I was talking to said, yeah, our average lifetime value of a patient is $120,000 because they'd come in for several months. There was very high out-of-network reimbursements, and they usually came in more than once. So they assumed it was a $120,000 reimbursement. And this dovetails into some of the marketing that people were doing. Again, there was a desperation to get the patients, and they didn't care how, which was unfortunate. But also, when we would go into even large providers that were considered to be sophisticated in the space, they had cost per acquisitions on their PPC campaigns for Google Ads of more than $12,000. And I can tell you that we went into at least 5 of the biggest national brands in the country, and those were the CPAs. That's how much they were paying. They didn't even know it. They didn't even know how much they were paying because they were making so much money. No one was paying attention to it. And this is pretty common in business in general. If things are working and the money's flowing, we're like, yeah, pretty good. It's fine. We don't get called in a lot of the time, either on the marketing end or the consulting end, until things start to break, until something gets painful, right? And then it's got to be fixed. And it's just normal across business, substance use or anything else. So I think that context was important too, and just understanding the money, because we had average client spends of $1 million a month. That was not uncommon. Almost nobody is spending $1 million a month these days, even the large providers on just PPC. They've definitely diversified their spends. So where was an inflection point? One of them was LegitScript, right? That was Google, clampdown. That was actually NATAP, so the National Association of Treatment Providers. They have largely been a coterie of legacy providers in the space for a long time. And they were getting trumped by these new people coming in with all this money and this business savvy. Originally, when you look at legacy providers within the country, they built their programs really on reputation. Very passionate people, very focused on giving treatment as they defined it. And there also wasn't a lot of competition. And so you gravitated towards them. If you were looking for treatment, you were going to find one of the 15 providers that existed in the country at the time. So they were really left out in the lurch when all of this new money came in and people started marketing everywhere, and they saw their volumes drop significantly. And they're like, oh my God, where did all our patients go? A lot of the calls I used to get early on when we started in the industry were, my phone used to ring off the hook, and then now it's not ringing at all. And they didn't know why. They didn't know why it was ringing in the first place, right? They weren't even doing a lot of marketing at the first time. People didn't have call centers. They were just people that cared and they wanted to help other people, usually that built a program. So there was no business savvy, no marketing. So as the money came in, as private equity came in, as more sophisticated business people came in, they were good at the marketing piece. And that's where we ended up being really successful is because we originally were very much partnering with all of the smaller and the mid-sized providers that were at a loss. They're like, what happened? Why isn't our phone ringing? It was so easy before. Now it's so hard. They were searching for answers, searching for solutions. And then PPC was a part of that with LegitScript.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was, I think it was Parity from the Affordable Care Act, meaning that now under the Affordable Care Act, you have to treat mental health and addiction related challenges the same way you would treat a broken bone, right? They need to be able to be covered. And so suddenly now there's insurance reimbursement available for people who are struggling with addiction and mental health at a much different scale. And so that creates this huge demand and people are chasing the money. And when people chase money, they do stupid things. And so some of the things that you mentioned are deceptive marketing practices. Maybe explain, why did LegitScript need to jump in here? What was happening that caused this overhaul in the way that pay-per-click advertising and other types of advertising were done? What were the side effects of this kind of body brokering system?
It's such a good question, and it is indicative of the mentality of the space at the time, and that mentality has actually carried over to today. So when you look at pay-per-click, you can turn those campaigns on, and even if you don't know what you're doing and how to run a good Google Ads campaign, there's enough that's easy that makes sense. Like, I should probably target people searching for drug rehab, right? So even if you don't know how to optimize a campaign, create a good ad, build your tracking infrastructure, if you at least get that going, you're probably going to start getting some call volume. And if some of that call volume is crisis volume, that's super easy to convert. So I don't need a good call team, right? I just need the calls to come in. And then the last piece of that was what I talked about in terms of the large reimbursement. So they didn't really know how to run campaigns. They didn't have good call centers. They weren't optimized around any of these components that are super important today, but they were still profitable because we're making so much money. They could spend 12 to 15. I mean, we've had clients that were saying, it's okay if we spend $20,000 on a cost per acquisition. And I mean, that never sits well with me. I'm like, really? Are we going to spend that? Shouldn't that money be going towards care, right? Are we really going to spend $20,000 per patient when we could be doing better marketing, more comprehensive channels that take longer investment? But that's the key, right? Other channels, you can't just turn on and start getting call volume. Other channels require reputation builds. They require audience targeting. They require much stronger messaging, search engine optimization, AI optimization. I'm sure we'll talk about. These are not small, easy things, right? I always say to people, if you could start a business and then start making money tomorrow, everyone would have a business. Like, that's not how 99% of business works. Yeah, in the treatment space, it kind of did for a minute, for a small moment in time. You could literally hang a shingle, blow money out the water on PPC, but still get a high enough reimbursement to cover your waste and be profitable. And then that's completely gone. So a big shift that's happened today that people still really struggle with is the investment piece, is the fact that they have to put money down now from a marketing standpoint that's going to pay dividends in 6 months, in a year. We still have providers that call us and say, okay, well, I heard you guys run TV campaigns and Facebook campaigns and search engine optimization. Then like, we want to try it for like 2 weeks and see how many admissions we get. And it just shows you the mentality of how much of a disconnect there is between reality, how business growth works, and the expectations that had developed in the industry at one time.
Yeah. And also, people were dying, right?
Right.
People were dying because they would click on a pay-per-click advertisement from a treatment center that had no certified clinicians, had no evidence-based treatment modalities, and they would show up there and they would die within their care. And so Google and LegitScript and other folks came together and said, hey, we've got to do something, right? Or they would have systems in which they'd have business development representatives flying people from different states to be able to go to their treatment center, even though that's probably not the best thing for the person, because once they're done with their 28 days of residential treatment, they're dropped back into their home environment, and there's no aftercare, there's no alumni program, there's no presence in where they're from. And so then they more easily relapse, right? And so, and maybe feel worse because they did all of this stuff and spent all of this money, and then they relapsed again. And so people were dying. And so they had to come up with a mechanism to help make sure that people who are advertising on Google and spending money, that they have some sort of backing. And I hear it from treatment centers all the time. And they say, I don't want to pay more money to be able to advertise on Google. And I get that. And the thing you need to remember is that neither do people who don't have good treatment programs. They don't want to spend that money either, right? They don't want to go through the hassle of being able to list all of their clinicians with their credentials. And I've done the LegitScript process myself for a treatment center. It's actually not that comprehensive. And really, it's stuff that you should have on file anyways. It includes things like, I need to be able to look up who owns a website. That's like the who is part of this thing. Shouldn't you want to know who's behind a website of a treatment center that you're going behind, so that if something is fishy, that you can like actually hold them accountable? Or looking at the credentials of the people who are administering care on staff, right? So you're submitting all of those, or making sure that it's a valid business license and entity behind a location, that it's actually doing what it says it's going to do. That's like really ground level information that you should really have on hand anyways. And so paying that amount of money just to be able to enter into pay-per-click advertising, one, it needed to happen because people were taking advantage of the system. They were false advertising and people were dying. And there needed to be a higher level of care when people are in their most desperate state, right? So, and as there was like a bunch of different legislation and lawsuits that also kind of spurned this, but basically it was saying, hey, we can't keep doing things the way we're doing because people are dying. And to your credit, one of the things that you mentioned is we're spending all of this money on pay-per-click advertising. What about putting that money towards something that's better for the actual individual, like paying the clinicians better, or being able to offer a variety of therapeutic modalities, or any number of things that would be much more of an investment in the person who's trying to get better and would ultimately lead to better outcomes. So like, I'm really glad you brought up and kind of tied together those pieces there. Okay. So we talked about some of the problems with the things in the treatment center industry, the negative, the downsides. Then stuff started to change. We start seeing big shifts in like the Google algorithm with things like EEAT. Maybe could you unpack a little bit more about how it's changed since some of these, I don't know, governing bodies or algorithm changes have happened? What is the next step? So what did treatment centers have to do after this happened?
So Google clearly had a concern around this, that there was a liability piece, but Google always had a kind of a core mission to like do good in the world. And so it was a core part of their value system to not be, regardless of how much money they were making or could be making, right? They wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening as little as possible. To your point, it can be frustrating. It's an extra cost to providers, but I would say it's a legitimate and viable cost of doing business because it does save lives. Nowadays, it's a little bit easy to get LegitScript, but it has professionalized the field more. It has made things better. And that dovetailed with not just what we were seeing like with Google, but really a broader awareness across US culture. You have movies like Patient Brokering now. You had John Oliver do a sketch on the negativity of rehabs. There was a whole series in Orange County, the Rehab Riviera articles that I've been interviewed on those, and they've done whole segments on the negativity happening in that area of the country. A lot more legislation passed. Mom groups, tons of mom groups talk about how to be very, very careful with the program you're saying. So basically you had this dissemination of information that say, hey, the rehab industry is not traditional healthcare. Mm-hmm. That was part of, unfortunately, what people are capitalizing on is, in general, we trust our healthcare providers. I don't go to look for a doctor or a dentist and like worry about them being shady people or providing low quality care. I might look for a dentist I like more, but I'm going to assume that all dentists are going to give me good dental care, let's say, right? And that wasn't the case in the rehab space. And so it took a while for people to realize that there was this Florida shuffle or these other issues across the country. So that trust component started to come into it. And so you started to see a lot more marketing needs around building trust, building a reputation. And Google also continued that algorithmically. So we started to see a localization of treatment. To your point earlier, it actually is most of the time better for people to seek care locally. And I can say that with a lot of confidence because I have good relationships with a lot of the heads of behavioral health at the payers, and they have that in their data sets. So when they look at their millions of members across the country, they see their members that go closer to home consistently have better outcomes in terms of return to the ER less, return to use less, return to treatment less. They just do better in general. So that is a fact. That's not, just kind of supposition that's out there. So Google saw that as well and said, okay, if people are searching for treatment, they're not searching for treatment in California or Florida. If they're not from those states, they're searching for treatment in their backyard. And so that localized it. And you also had algorithm shifts around your money, your life. So Google had a lot of concerns of, how can people be hurt using our product, which is our ranking algorithms and our Google Ads campaigns? And people can be hurt through financial scams. They can be hurt through healthcare scams. And so Google had a very big emphasis on making sure that their algorithm was promoting quality providers, ideally local providers, so that people were getting legitimate care and Google wasn't being part of a process that hurt people.
Yeah, I think the emphasis on trust is something that I kind of want to talk about with you, because one of the unique things that you and Circle Social do, and I can say this from a previous client standpoint, because when I worked at a treatment center, we called y'all because we were seeing problems within our treatment center and we were saying, what's wrong with our marketing? And I was thinking to myself, I think our marketing's really good. I don't think there's any holes. And you said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come to your center. We're going to interview your clinicians. We're going to interview your marketing executives. Sometimes they were a little bit, felt a little bit cornered if you interview a CEO and ask about lead quality and things like that. We're going to interview the clients themselves, and we're going to determine, are you doing the things that you say you're doing in your marketing versus how it's showing up in advertising? Maybe you can kind of walk through that example a little bit and say, what are you noticing now? If it's not about differentiation, but building trust, how does that process kind of reveal things when it comes to the way treatment centers should be positioning themselves now?
There's so much to that question that's really important for treatment providers to understand. And this is a piece that has been missed for a long time. And again, it's not unique to the treatment industry. I think it's unique, common in businesses in general. You have to have the connection between your marketing promise and what you deliver on. Just hands down for any business. So I always give the example of a restaurant. If you market that you have high-end service and the best steaks in town, and then you go and you get like a rubbery steak and you had to wait 30 minutes to be seated, now you have a disconnect. And what happens when that disconnect is there? You get bad reviews online, you get bad word of mouth in the community, and the business ultimately burns down. Your marketing actually accelerates the destruction of the business because people are like, oh, these guys are liars. They don't do a good job, versus let's say you did have crappy steaks and crappy service, but it was reasonably priced, and say, hey, look, we've got the cheapest steaks in town. Then when I come in, I'm like, oh, that service sucked and the steaks were rubbery, but they were cheap and that's what I came for. So this works, right? And so people are happy. It can grow the business. The treatment world got lucky for a moment in time where it didn't have to deal with that dynamic so much because, again, there was more demand than there was supply. Google reviews weren't used as much at the time. People were in crisis, so they weren't researching programs, et cetera, et cetera. And so you were able to kind of fly under the radar of a reputation build and a trust build. Yeah. That's a requirement of a foundation of any good, long-standing, successful business. That's not the case now because the algorithms have localized, because treatment has localized, because reimbursements have been cut to what are considered to be, for the most part, normative rates. That doesn't allow you to use huge marketing spends to get people from across the country. You do have to concentrate your marketing spend into a smaller area where it's going to be more likely to be more successful. We're going to have cumulative impact on it. The more you concentrate in an area or with a demographic, the more likely you are to start to form connections between those groups of people. And then that builds your word of mouth and your trust. So that trust component is really important from a reputation standpoint. And then your question around, well, how do we make sure that we're doing that? Everyone has to be talking to each other. We go into so many programs and it's siloed. Marketing is doing one thing, business development is doing something else. The clinicians are just doing whatever the clinicians are doing, but no one's really on the same page. And that leads to that situation that I just talked about with the restaurant, where there's can be a big disconnect between what's happening. Also, these days, it's about trust in general, but also about differentiation. You have so many providers. It's the exact opposite of what it was 10 years ago. You have more supply than you do demand for most areas of the country, particularly for commercial insurance or higher end programs. And so the worst thing you can do from our perspective when you're trying to be competitive in this environment is provide what we call vanilla care. Nothing wrong with vanilla care. Your clinicians care about your patients. They're trying to provide good treatment, but it's the same as literally the other 30 people around you. And so when you're in a competitive environment, when you have less patients than there are people looking for treatment, you have to have a reason that you stand out, that people talk about you, that people are excited to go to you. And so that's a big piece that we push. And then that has to have a trust component. So if you guys say you are the best trauma program in the city, that could be a potential differentiator, but you have to then deliver on that trauma piece and be able to communicate accurately like what it is and how you guys are good. So what we see on websites so often and in marketing material so often is like, we are the best trauma treatment provider. Why? You have accreditation around that that's different. Do you do specialized training for your clinicians? Is there a specialized recruitment or hiring process for clinicians? Did you bring in Claudia Black and have her curriculum installed at your program, right? You have to be able to prove to people, because they're, in general, people don't trust marketing, right? There's a baseline distrust. In the rehab space, there's a higher level of distrust because of all the media that exists around, hey, you got to be careful in this space, and the communications that happen among mom groups, et cetera. So you're climbing a hill. There's some barriers to overcome when you're trying to build trust within the treatment space. So it is much more than what I say, lipstick on a pig, or just tactical hacks and saying we are the best, or, throwing out a buzzword like trauma-informed care. You have to deliver on it, and you have to be able to communicate how you're delivering on it so that people will actually believe you.
Yeah. So if I live in a small town, I'm going to treat the people that I interact with very differently than if I'm in a big bustling city in which I will never see this person again. I might honk my horn. I might yell at somebody to move in the street. You see it all the time, right? It's very different vibes. And what we've moved into is small town marketing,
yes,
local SEO or search engine optimization, in which you actually need to do these things that you say you're going to do because those people are going to show up in a digital way again, right? So sometimes that means your Google reviews are going to come back to haunt you. If you say that the food is chef prepared, but then they get there and it's not, or if you say that you're a trauma-informed program, but you don't cover any trauma, you just do coping skills within your treatment, right? Which was the case for the previous treatment center that I worked at, right? And we saw this gap, that siloing that was happening. We knew that there was search volume for this. And when we asked the clinicians, they're like, do you do this? But in actuality and in practice, it didn't happen. Right. And when you talk to the clients who are being served, it wasn't happening. And so that communication has to happen all the way around. And I know that there's some treatment centers out there right now who are listening or watching this, and they're saying, but listen, we work in addiction treatment or mental health. We're working with people on the worst days of their lives. Of course, we're going to get bad reviews. And I would say, yes, for sure. But the question is not if you will get bad reviews. It's, does the velocity of positive reviews and good word outpace the every once in a while negative reviews that happen? Because if it's not, then you're going to find yourself in a trust and a brand problem. Another way that people describe a brand is it's what people say about you when you're not there. It's not the only way to describe brand, but it's one of them. And it's what the referring clinicians, the previous clients, the therapists, people underestimate how much the therapist's good word goes for a treatment center. And the treatment center industry, I think, has a big reputation of burning clinicians by giving them huge group sizes or underpaying them or not supporting them. And so all of that stuff matters, right? All of that stuff matters, and it's starting to show up. And by the time people call you in Circle Social, it's because that they're seeing this thing and they think it's really a problem with their marketing. But most of the time, are you finding it's really a problem with communication and the way that they run their business?
Yeah, it's definitely 50-50. 50% of the time we go in and the marketing's just a mess. Like people don't have a strategy in place. They're throwing money in different places without really understanding the platforms or the channels. That does happen about half the time. And then the other half of the time is there's all these other broken pieces. There is no real differentiation in place. Maybe the marketing team was saying something, but that's not happening. The call team is not set up for success. They haven't been trained well. They don't know how to handle phone calls. I was just on a call with a client that has largely done Medicaid in the space for a while. And so they brought us on to try and build their commercial volume. And so we're starting to generate a lot more commercial calls based on all the optimizations that we've done, but they're still handling the phone the same way. When you take a Medicaid call, it's very transactional. They're like, hey, I need to get in. They're like, okay, great. We'll get you in tomorrow at 3:00. Can you come? That's it. That's the phone call. Commercial doesn't work that way. Commercial is I'm calling 3 to 4 places. I'm going to vet these people. I'm going to check them out. I'm expecting you to understand me and tell me how your program uniquely suits my needs versus your competitors. That's a 20 to a 40 minute conversation versus a 2 to a 5 minute conversation. And you have to be much better at building rapport, at having empathy, at connecting your differentiators to specific pain points of the caller. That's a whole skill set, right? So now that's what we're working with them on. So those pieces come into play a lot. And then, again, there's a lack of optimization. If it doesn't really appear broken, people don't invest in it so much. So you'll see like business development is a common one. No one's supporting the business development team from the marketing side a lot of the time, which is frustrating for us because the largest number of your patient volume, or the highest percentage of your patient volume, I should say, usually comes from business development. And it should, because that's a cheaper cost per acquisition from a business standpoint. Yet people are like, okay, they just go out there and do it. And they're like, all right, it's working well enough with the good ones that we have. And so we'll leave it alone, versus saying you can actually get another 20, sometimes 30% of qualified admissions volume from your business development team. If you do event-based marketing strategies, if you have LinkedIn campaign support, if you have television campaign support, if you're large enough, these things that people just don't think about because, again, it doesn't look broken over here versus let's optimize this. And that all comes down to the trust components that you're talking about and making sure that everything adds up, right? When people look at a Google review, when people go to recovery.com, I mean, you guys see it in your own data, right? If you have more reviews on the site, you get higher conversions from those treatment providers. Like it's very important.
Yeah. One of the pieces that I wanted to unpack with you is that you mentioned the support from marketing when it comes to business development. And we're going to jump into the tactics here in a second and some of those numbers that I think will be helpful for people. Because when you work at an agency, you see a wide variety of different types of treatment providers. At recovery.com, we see a ton of different treatment providers. And so I think it's helpful to be able to give people some general ideas. So we'll talk about some of those numbers here in a second. But one of the things you mentioned is like support for business development. And a big flaw that I see within treatment providers right now that they have not evolved in is that they're stuck in the transactional side or the measurement side of their marketing. Can you explain a little bit about how, if you can't track it, it's not worth it, gets in the way of a treatment center being able to expand to their business development reach?
I love that question. It's a soapbox of mine where people get obsessed with the data and saying, okay, like so if we want to take business development, that's probably an easier one. You go in and you sponsor an event in the local community. And so, of course, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a way to collect information and then have your call center reach out and contact those people and see if you can get some admissions out of it. And then what you'll do is you'll say, okay, well, how many admissions did we get from this event? Is this a valuable event? Should we do it again? Makes sense. You should be tracking those things. Like there's no reason not to do that. It's helpful. Provides a little bit of what I call directionality, but it shouldn't be guiding 100% of your strategic decision-making process, because we know that's not really how those things work. What really works is that you're there, you're present, you're starting to build trust in the community, and you don't do it in year one.
Mm-hmm.
It's year 3, it's year 4, where these people are seeing you again and again and again. Because remember, like if I'm a discharge nurse at a hospital, I literally have like 30 business development reps that I'm seeing on a regular basis knocking on my door. And they're from different providers. And half the time they're a different rep than was here 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a lot of trust around a certain provider. Whereas if I see them engaging in the community, paying for sponsorships, being present, maybe holding some events and some CU events and things like that I can come to, then eventually you'll start to see referral volume climbing. And you're never going to be able to track that back specifically to this one event. Like that's just not realistic. But if I'm thinking as an executive, I'm thinking strategically, does this make sense? If I invest in our community, if we're present, if we add value, if we help people understand how we are the best fit for this demographic of patients, should that see a return? Yeah, 100%. So I need to be thinking strategically rather than focusing on the data. You can be too short-term when you're focused on the data, right? Like I want an immediate return. That example I gave of like, hey, let's run some Facebook campaigns. And if we don't see admissions in 2 weeks, we're going to shut them down. You're looking at the wrong time window. You don't understand the development that's needed to go into a Facebook campaign for that to start to influence your admissions process, and then also how that works. So we'll look at from leads, whether it's business development or direct to consumer. We get a lot of clients that say, okay, well, I want to run Facebook or I want to run LinkedIn, but I want to understand the ROI. So I want you to gate lock some content or gate lock our website, and it has to be a lead form. So we get their name, we get their number. How many people want to give their name and number to like a random treatment center before they know anything about them, right? They just want to look at the page or look at the content and then see like, maybe these guys are worth exploring more. Maybe I should give them a call. What we see in our data is so you can see who clicks on a lead form and then the percent that fills it out. 90% of people on average that click on a lead form will not provide you their name and their number or their contact information. You're losing 90% of your potential patients or referral sources just so that you can get some confirmation on your ROI. And to me, that's a horrible idea. That's not strategic. Strategic is, we know we've put out good content. We know it's going to communicate well to the audience that we're trying to get in front of. That's going to get them to take action because we're building trust with them over time. You have to have confidence around that. I mean, that's what we do at Marketing in Circle Social. That's what this is, right? You're putting really good, helpful information out there to people. Will I get a client from this podcast? I have no idea. And the answer is probably no, but they'll see this and they might read some more of our content and start following our content. And then 6 months from now, after I didn't even know that they're starting to follow us, but we've built up a lot of trust through our content, other things that they've seen, then they give us a call. Same thing happens with patients. Same thing happens with referral partners. You have to be willing to put in that time. The last example I would give, and we get this all the time because we help a lot of organizations scale, what you did yesterday at one facility is not what's going to work at 3 facilities. What works at 3 is not going to work at 10. What works at 10 is not going to work at 20, right? Really easy example. Let's say that I am running Google Ads campaigns in a particular community. Well, that's based on search volume, right? There's only so many people searching for treatment in a given month, let's say. I can grow a treatment center to a certain size, let's say 15, 20 beds with some PPC, SEO, and BD. Once I expand bed count in that community, beyond that, there's not enough search volume. There's not enough people searching in a month. So now I have to move to a channel like Facebook or TikTok. When I move to those channels, that's very different. Again, what's happening in PPC? They're a lot more in crisis. They're looking for treatment now, right? That's why they're searching for drug rehab near me because they want to go to a treatment program. On Facebook, they don't. They're going about their daily lives. You're getting more top of funnel earlier in the patient journey. So you have to, your PPC data doesn't give you any predictive analytics in terms of how Facebook will or should work. And then on top of that, it goes to your call center team. So again, PPC is a little bit more transactional. There's some more urgency there. If you've got a bed, if you take their insurance, if you do a decent job on the phone, you can probably get that person in. Facebook, they're researching anywhere from 3 to 8 other providers. They will shortlist that down to 3 to 4, and then they're going to call all 3 to 4 of those. Mm-hmm. So your conversation that you're having on the phone is really different from what you have on PPC. Again, did any of your previous data give you any kind of insight into how much money should be allocated to Facebook, what the timelines are for Facebook, what training you need to do to retrain your call team? No, you have none of that data, none of it. Now we got it, so that's helpful. So maybe you can find other experts or resources out there that provide that data, those insights for you. But your point, and it's an excellent one, is that the data is just a starting point. It helps you gain some insight and sometimes some directionality, but it is not the whole story. And if you don't have strategy behind kind of your thought process and your interpretation and also the limits of your data, you're going to be in a pretty difficult place.
I want to summarize some of the things I heard you saying. There's a difference between interruption marketing versus search marketing.
Yes.
People are not going to social media to find addiction treatment. And if you show up there, you're interrupting their feed. They're looking for entertainment. You're interrupting it with something about your brand, right? It's different than SEO or pay-per-click advertising, which is search-based marketing. You know that they're looking for something like that. And so the intent is different. The results are going to be different. But you are going to be, if you're not thinking on a long enough time horizon, you are going to be stunting the growth that you can, and the impact you can make as a treatment center, because you don't have enough vision when it comes to where your treatment center will be in 3 years and 5 years. Another thing I heard you say is you kind of start at the end of the funnel. You start at the call center or the people who are picking up the calls and understanding this. And now, as somebody who's written a script or a call flow for treatment centers, I understand this all too well. You cannot keep putting water in the bucket if the bucket is leaky. One of my favorite things that when I worked with a call center at a treatment center was, you call the center and they say, "Hi, this is Marissa." And you have to wait. And right. You're like, well, okay, I guess I'm Clint. I'm looking for alcohol treatment. I don't know what else to say, right? Instead of, "Hi, this is Marissa with X treatment center. What's the reason why you're calling today?" Or starting a conversation. It's basic little small things. Also, looking at the key metrics tied to your call center, like talk time, is going to be a really helpful thing. If you take insurance, then your talk time should be pretty high. I'm looking at a quality call for at least 5 minutes, but probably much more than that, to be able to determine if the person who's calling is like calling and we can help them. Also tracking throughout the journey from lead to qualified lead, that they're have the acuity that you can serve, that they have an insurance that you can take, that they're within the age or demographic range that's acceptable for your program, and then to admission. Like, those are some basic metrics. So you start at the end of the funnel and then you kind of work your way back and say, okay, how are each of these different channels going with that? And I want to kind of talk about something that we've been discussing a little bit in the community. We're having an article that's going to come out in a couple of weeks, and it's basically, what does good look like for a treatment center? And so I posed the question to different marketing professionals and CEOs and treatment center owners. And you were one of those people. And I said, hey, if you were trying to get 100 admits for a treatment center, and by the way, of course, I know this is all very contextual. It depends on your level of care and the treatment modalities and what state you're in, the competition, all of those things. But if you were trying to get 100 admits to your treatment center, how many of those should be coming from business development? How many of those should be coming from organic? And then how many of those should be coming from advertising? And could you kind of explain your answer? And then I'll kind of unpack some of the generalities that we saw.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, high degree of variability, lots of factors, but we have a baseline model that we've used that we found to be really successful with both small and large providers at scale. And so what we look for is 50% or 50 of those admissions would come from business development. So half of your volume's coming from community referrals, essentially, which goes back to your comment around trust. Why are people going to refer to you? They're going to refer to you because they trust you to take care of their patients. So super important there. 20% is usually alumni in some way. It could be readmissions. It could be referrals from alumni. There's some kind of word of mouth component that's valuable. Really good longstanding providers will have a much higher volume of alumni driving their admissions. But on average, if you're not a legacy provider without decades of experience in that community, about 20% is pretty solid. And then the other 30% is coming from your paid media campaigns. We want to see the least amount of that volume coming from PPC, especially after a program's been going for a while. New programs have to rely on PPC. There's not much else out there to get things moving right away, depending on how your pro forma is built. But your other channels, your search engine optimization, your AI optimization now, your Facebook campaigns, your TikTok campaigns, that should all account for about 30%.
So you'd lump organic into that 30%?
I do.
Right. So it's some mix between paid and organic SEO is that remaining 30%, right?
Yeah. And we do that because SEO is so long term. There's so much difficulty around driving that number. So on average, if we look from a digital standpoint, our SEO cost per admission is the lowest among all the channels. If we could get all of our patients from SEO, that would be ideal from a cost standpoint. And we have a very, very large client that had a huge volume of admissions coming from SEO. Yeah. And that was incredibly profitable for them. But it takes significant investment. That particular client spent $1 million a month on SEO for several years before they were able to have it account for the majority of their admissions.
I think I know the client that you're thinking of. Yeah. And when I worked at a treatment center, and this varies, right? As we mentioned, but over 50% of our admissions came from organic SEO, but it also took a lot of vision from the treatment center to invest in that.
Yes.
And when they wanted to grow at a rate that wasn't conducive for that, then they cut back on those efforts, and then they dropped to I think now they're at 5 or 10%, right? Which is rough.
Yeah.
But it just shows that what happens when you kind of try to take that transactional approach. One of the things that you mentioned is about search intent when it comes to growing, and doing something for one treatment center is going to look completely different at another treatment center. I know a treatment center, when they wanted to expand into a different state, they said, we're going to run the same playbook we did in this other state. Mm-hmm. We're going to look at the demographics of the area. We're going to look at the insurance providers for that area. There's different tools that you can use to be able to pull these. Badger is one of them. And to be able to say, okay, this would be a great place to have a facility. I raised the red flag and I said, I think this is a bad idea, because when I look at drug rehab near me for this query, it's crickets. It's really low. And I told them, I said, I will get us to rank number 1 organically for that. And we can bid on PPC all day and we'll show up number 1 too. And we'll be at the number 1 in the map pack, and it will not fill enough.
Yeah,
folks.
Exactly right.
But they ran the same playbook, and eventually they had to close down all of their treatment centers, multiple treatment centers in that state of service. And so that happens. That happens when we don't adjust to be able to make it specific to the people that we're trying to provide. And when we don't have a diverse approach, when we bank all of saying you're going to be able to get 50% of your admits in organic marketing when there's not enough search volume is going to mess that up.
Yeah.
One of the things we're seeing from early results of people who have taken the survey about that 100 admit question is that regardless of the numbers that you give, usually people are spending the most on pay-per-click advertising.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
They are spending the least on organic and business development. Mm-hmm. And I would consider Alumni as business development. I think it's just as useful. They have very similar functions. It's almost like altruistic marketing in that way, but that's a commonality. And so when you start saying those things mismatch a little bit, then you have some cause for alarm. It's like, oh, I'm probably not investing the way I should be, right? It's going to explode your PPC cost, or it's going to tank your business development referrals. There's multiple ways that you can do that, but just some of those numbers are helpful there.
Yeah, I would comment on there. Again, it's all understanding kind of the strategic process. So let's take business development. we say this to clients all the time. You're spending too much on PPC. Let's pull some of that money and put it over here. But we do have to think about like, what is our volume there? So if you look at business development, generally it takes those guys 3 to 4 months to get up and running, to kind of be paying for themselves. And then what we see in our data is that they become about 20% better every year that they're with the same provider. Not working in the industry, not years of experience doing the role with the same provider, because there's a trust connection between the provider, the referral source, and the same rep. And so as that trust is built over time, you start to see more referrals coming from them. Like, your reps are generally only get so many referrals, and you can't have them tripping over each other, right?
Yeah.
So I can't just explode the number of reps and maximize that, just like I can't keep scaling PPC to the moon. There is a limit. And so we see that with clients all the time, and they're like, oh, the BD stuff is working, so let's triple the BD team.
Yep.
That doesn't work. The farther away they get, the less likely they are to be able to get referrals. They might start tripping over each other, competing with each other. So you have to think strategically about your capital allocation and what the potential results are until you're going to get diminishing returns for that to work for you.
Yeah. So closing out, we would be remiss if we did not talk about AI. Everybody is wondering about AI. I think we have some good insights to be able to share about AI, but as we look into the future, of all the stuff that we've talked about, where do you see AI fitting into the way treatment centers should be thinking about their marketing?
Yeah. So we could obviously do a whole podcast on AI itself. Just keeping it to kind of the focus of this conversation and what makes sense from a marketing, how does it fit into the mix? How are they investing in it? How do they need to be thinking about it? So first and foremost, we are seeing some admissions come in from AI optimization, but it's very small right now. It is also a little bit harder to track than some of your other channels. And so that comes back to your metrics question. And do we just rely 100% on the data? But the way that we've been talking to clients about is this is one of those that's an investment for the future. AI optimization is not easy. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of ongoing work. So it's not something that you're going to turn on like PPC. For that reason, you're saying, okay, I see the direction search is going, and it's absolutely going towards AI or AI answers and queries. And so if that's the case, do we start investing now so that we can stand out, that we can be on top in this super hyper competitive environment? So that's how you should be thinking about AI. And then from a budgeting standpoint, and this is something I wanted to mention in general, a lot of providers try to throw a marketing budget and get a return on that budget within like 30 to 60 days. That is a terrible marketing strategy in general, because that's not how trust is built. That's not how reputations work. You have all these moving pieces. You got to make sure are lined up with it. So we always say, take a marketing spend that's comfortable for you and just stick with it. And you can tweak it around and talk to your team or talk to experts like your marketing agency and ask them like, hey, are we allocating capital right? Are we seeing the results we want to see? Those are great questions to be asking, but you should just have a comfortable spend that if it doesn't do great, fine. At least you've got that going and you're working on it and you're tweaking on it. So your AI optimization should be part of that thought process. We're going to take, 5%, 10% of our marketing budget, and we're going to start to invest in AI with it, because this is where the industry is going to go, and it's going to become an important channel for us. The second piece of that is what's important about it. Especially if you look at the large language models, those are very diversified in the sources that they pull from. And so we actually did a project internally, and we looked at millions of website hits. And so we have different tools that we use to analyze the different chat bots or the different AI bots. So your Perplexity, your Gemini, your ChatGPT, your Copilot, right? And we see what sources they're using to that they consider authoritative. And if you look in general, you've probably seen articles like this in the newspaper or something. They'll say, a lot of AI is using Reddit. Like 60% of queries, and there's kind of a trust score that the bots give to these different websites, come from Reddit. That doesn't happen in the treatment space. Treatment space is completely different. So the AI bots, the LLMs, they train on different data sets, and they build specific models around those data sets. So in behavioral health, what we're finding is that recovery.com is one of the primary sources that's being used by most of the AI bots in identifying trusted sources and trusted information. And this is important because the way that they're thinking about things is somewhat like a person does. The website, your website as a provider, is some marketing collateral, right? Can I fully trust it? I need to verify. I want to look at Google reviews. I want to look at what people are saying about it online. I want to look at third party, what I would be considered a trusted entity. And so recovery.com is one of those primary sources from the AI bots point of view. And then it goes into things like PR. Are you mentioned in local news sources? Are you mentioned in your Chamber of Commerce? What good marketing has always been has been a certain level of diversification and building trust across a community and across multiple channels. AI is just really, if people understand it, it's really driving that point home.
And from a content perspective, because that's my expertise, and I'll just kind of give some quick hit things, that AI marketing is actually more like traditional marketing in that you need to be featured in not paid for, unbiased publications. The same way if you were trying to get a Wikipedia page, you need to have enough credible sources that are not press releases, that are not your blog posts, but where local news or other organizations that are trusted in the community that have a high domain authority as a website are talking about you and what you do in the community. And that only comes from you interacting with others, especially on a local level. And so if you want to excel, you actually kind of need to think about old school marketing, which is really weird for people when they think about AI.
Right.
Some other really simple things when it comes to AI marketing is that your content needs to be refreshed more frequently. One study done by AirOps where, and they work with organizations like Airbnb and homes.com and things like that. What they found is that organizations that refresh their content every 3 months, we're seeing double-digit traffic increases, right? The AI is from AI. They're preferring more recent content, right? Which becomes challenging depending on your content.
Right.
And if you're looking at recovery.com content or other big organizations, you're thinking like, how can I even compete with these kinds of things? I don't have a studio like this. I don't have like a huge budget. The thing you need to think about is local,
yes,
right?
100%.
Because if you focus on your local content, it will be easier for you to win. It's something that even a big organization like recovery.com can't compete with you on from that local of a level, right? If you think about your city and the nearby locations, that's something that you're always going to be able to win as a local treatment center, especially in AI search results, which is going to be the most impactful for you anyways. So those are like some quick hits for you when it comes to like clarity of content. There's other nerdy stuff when it comes to heading hierarchy and direct question and answer kind of content. But really, if you do those things, that's going to be, if you refresh your content enough, if you are simple and succinct in your answering people's questions, and if you localize your content, and if you focus on getting cited in big domain authority or local resources, you're going to show up much better in local search results. There's no secret keyword. There's no secret using one type of link versus another link. There's no, that's not going to matter. Those are the things that are really going to help you.
Yeah, I think to just emphasize that a little bit, so much of it. So a lot of SEO is your website. You can control it. It's your asset. It's your content on the site. It's the way you do your backlinking, your internal linking on the site, right? You control a lot of that. AI, most of the narrative is third-party sources. So just like traditional kind of marketing and PR, you have to start to control this narrative that's happening in the community. AI looks at trust sources, and if there's discrepancies in the information, like what's on your website is out of date, or there's an article online that says something different, then it considers that a weak trust source and it might not recommend you, or it'll say, we're actually kind of confused about what level of care this treatment provider provides. So, maybe check out this one that has clarity on it. That's hard. And that's why the AI optimization is so difficult, because it's third-party sources that you don't control. And then to your point, like that local engagement, let's say that I sponsor a local mental health fair. You're probably going to get references off of that, right? Some other nonprofit in the community might mention it. You might get a little write-up in some local news article. That's the stuff that AI is really pulling from. And so that, going back to your ROI question, you can't track that accurately. There's no way to tie it specifically back, but that all of it that's going to be important is that local involvement drives communications that the bots pull from, and eventually make recommendations to people searching for treatment.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a roller coaster. It has been a wild ride. We've covered 10 years of addiction and mental health treatment marketing. I know that people are still going to have follow-up questions, and they're probably going to say, well, what about this and what about that? So if people want to connect with you or Circle Social or learn about you or any of the cool work that you're doing, where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, as always, our website, circlesocialinc.com. People can email me directly. It's just nick@circlesocialinc.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. So happy to connect with people there.
And listeners and watchers, we will put links for all of those things in the show notes and the description box for this episode. And like all of the talks that we do, this is about the people that we're serving. Remember, the better your marketing, the better your business, the more people you can help overcome addiction, overcoming mental health. And we will see you on the next episode.